Motors temporarily shutting down more than half of its plants in North America.
General Motors plans to close its plant in Lordstown, Ohio.
An ex-employee just dropped claims that are shaking GM to its core, and the fallout is spreading fast. For years, people whispered about strange failures, quiet buybacks, and engines dying way too early. But this new testimony, it's igniting a firestorm inside the auto world. And if the claims are true, the consequences won't stop at GM. They'll hit every owner on the road. Why did these allegations surface now? What pushed an insider to finally speak? And what could this mean for your vehicle's future? What's happening? The scandal didn't start with a broken engine. It started with a man who could no longer stomach the lies. An ex-employee from GM's powertrain division stepped forward with internal documents proving that the company did not just overlook defects in its V8 engines. It engineered them. According to him, GM knowingly installed components with failure rates so high that engineers joked about planned obsolescence baked into the block. He revealed secret meetings where project leads admitted the new V8 design could not survive real-world heat cycles or lubrication stress. Instead of fixing the problem, executives approved the engine anyway because the cheaper design saved millions during production. The goal was simple: hit profit targets now and deal with failures later. The whistleblower described lifters that were never hardened correctly, cam lobes that wore down in shockingly low mileage, and oil passages narrowed to cut machining time. He even detailed internal debates where engineers warned these engines would self-destruct under normal driving conditions. GM leadership's response? Silence, followed by aggressive rollout. GM sold these engines as the most reliable V8 lineup ever built, all while knowing they carried a built-in death sentence. The scam didn't start on the road. It started inside GM's own laboratories. But the proof didn't stay hidden, because the failures began speaking louder than GM ever intended. The whisper network that exposed the lie. The first hints of the scam surfaced not in boardrooms, but in grimy repair bays, where mechanics noticed something wildly wrong. Engines failed, not after years of abuse, but sometimes after a few thousand miles. And they failed the same way every time. Identical lifter collapse, identical camshaft destruction, identical oil starvation patterns. Technicians compared notes and realized these failures were not random or rare. They were patterned, predictable, and disturbingly uniform. Dealership insiders whispered that GM's internal service bulletins hinted at known lubrication irregularities and premature wear patterns, coded phrases that hid the truth behind corporate language. On forums, owners shared stories of brand new trucks dying at highway speeds without warning. Entire communities began piecing together the puzzle GM tried to bury. Mechanics labeled the issue the silent epidemic, while technicians joked privately that GM built a V8 designed to commit suicide. The ex-employees' leaked documents eventually reached some of these mechanics, confirming every fear they had. The failures were not coincidences. They were the direct result of shortcuts GM took deliberately. The Whisper Network didn't just uncover a mechanical defect. It uncovered a conspiracy of silence, stretching from service bays all the way to corporate headquarters. And when those whispers reached GM's engineers, the panic behind closed doors told its own story. Before we go deeper into what this whistleblower uncovered, make sure you like and subscribe so you do not miss the next part of this investigation. Share your thoughts as we continue exposing what GM hoped would stay buried forever. Inside the engineering meltdown, when the whistleblower's accusations collided with mounting real-world failures, GM's internal engineering departments spiraled into crisis. Emails circulated urgently between teams, revealing years of suppressed warnings. Engineers had documented overheating lifters, oil pressure drops, machining debris inside passages, and stress points that exceeded safe thresholds even under light loads. One internal report described the engine as a structural compromise posing long-term durability risk. Another warned that the active fuel management hardware was prone to catastrophic collapse. Yet every recommendation to halt production was shut down by leadership concerned about cost, timing, and marketing promises. The data showed that GM knew these engines would eventually fail, often violently, but counted on those failures happening after warranties expired. That was the scam: push the engine to market fast, profit quickly, and distance the company from the inevitable fallout. Engineers privately called the platform the time bomb. And when the lawsuits and consumer complaints finally erupted, GM scrambled to rewrite internal documentation and minimize the scale of the problem. The engineering meltdown wasn't caused by incompetence. It was caused by a deliberate decision to ignore engineers and protect quarterly earnings, even if that meant selling defective engines to hundreds of thousands of unsuspecting customers. But instead of fixing the problem, GM created the most cynical distraction of all: the great corporate cover-up. As failure after failure rolled in, GM did not admit the flaw. It doubled down on the scam. The company pushed a fix that was never meant to help customers. Instead of redesigning the defective parts, GM ordered dealerships to switch owners to thicker oil, claiming it would improve durability. In reality, the thicker oil simply masked the symptoms long enough to push failures past warranty limits. GM silently changed owner manuals, replaced oil caps, and issued internal service scripts instructing advisors to blame owners for improper maintenance. People with complete service records were still denied coverage. Technicians were pressured to find alternative causes, no matter how ridiculous, to avoid approving engine replacements. Behind the scenes, GM's public relations teams worked overtime to bury complaints, redirect blame, and stall any mention of a recall. Meanwhile, the company continued selling the exact same engines without disclosing the known risks. The scam was now fully exposed. GM engineered a faulty V8, hid the evidence, blamed customers, and issued a fake fix designed to shift responsibility. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a corporate strategy. And when this house of lies finally collapsed, the public learned the truth GM feared the most: that the betrayal went far deeper than anyone imagined. The illusion of the fix. GM finally addressed the growing engine failures, but what they called a solution quickly revealed itself as a calculated maneuver designed to protect the company rather than its customers. Instead of repairing or redesigning the defective components, GM quietly changed the recommended oil specification for hundreds of thousands of V8-powered vehicles. Owners were told to switch from the thin synthetic oil originally promoted as a performance enhancer to a much thicker blend. The shift was presented as harmless, even beneficial, but internal service notes revealed a different motivation entirely. Dealerships received updated manuals, revised oil caps, and corporate talking points, explaining that the thicker oil would improve durability. What customers were not told was that the thicker oil masked early signs of failure, slowing the onset of lifter collapse and camshaft damage just long enough to push many engines past warranty limits. GM effectively bought time, gambling that most engines would fail only after owners were responsible for repairs. The consequences for drivers were immediate. Fuel economy dropped noticeably, and vehicles felt heavier and less responsive. Owners who purchased trucks for efficiency suddenly faced higher operating costs. Meanwhile, inside GM's corporate offices, executives celebrated the reduced warranty exposure. The so-called fix was less an engineering correction and more a corporate shield, shifting the financial burden onto the very people who trusted the brand. But the fix was not GM's only weapon. Next came the warranty war, the warranty trap. When the thicker oil strategy delayed failures past the warranty cutoff, GM relied on another tactic designed to contain costs: a warranty system calibrated to deny as many claims as possible. The official coverage of 5 years or 60,000 miles seemed generous on paper, but it was built around strict conditions that left many owners unprotected when catastrophic failure finally occurred. Service departments were instructed to request complete maintenance records, with no exceptions. If a single oil change receipt was missing, misdated, or performed by a private mechanic rather than a certified shop, the claim could be denied outright. Customers were stunned to learn that small clerical gaps, unrelated to the root cause of their failures, could determine whether they owed thousands of dollars in repair costs. Families faced devastating financial consequences. Many had purchased their vehicles believing GM's reputation for durability would spare them from large repair bills. Instead, they encountered denials that felt scripted and predetermined. Small business owners who depended on their trucks for work found themselves without transportation and without support. Some were forced to take out loans to pay for repairs on vehicles that should have been covered. Inside dealerships, employees whispered about corporate pressure to keep warranty payouts low. Technicians privately admitted they could predict which claims would be denied before they even inspected the engine. The warranty safety net meant to protect customers had been transformed into a gatekeeping system designed to protect GM's bottom line. But frustrated owners did not give up. They fought back, and the courtroom doors finally blew open. The legal avalanche. As denial letters piled up and failures multiplied, the legal response grew from scattered individual complaints into a nationwide reckoning. Attorneys representing groups of owners began comparing cases and quickly discovered the same symptoms, the same failures, and the same corporate defenses appearing everywhere. A pattern that had been obvious to mechanics and technicians now became the foundation of a far larger legal attack. Class action lawsuits formed in multiple states, each representing thousands of drivers who believed they had been misled. Discovery requests forced GM to hand over internal documents, emails, and engineering reports. What emerged shocked even seasoned investigators. GM had been aware of widespread defects long before acknowledging any problem publicly. Internal communications revealed discussions about the financial risks of disclosure and strategies for avoiding large-scale recalls. Regulators stepped in as well. Federal agencies opened inquiries into whether GM had violated disclosure laws or misled consumers. Some investigators questioned whether criminal charges might be appropriate, given the scale of the alleged concealment. Plaintiffs, once unsure if their experiences were isolated incidents, suddenly found themselves part of a massive collective movement. The legal avalanche exposed the full extent of GM's decisions and confirmed what many owners suspected. The failures were not bad luck or individual misuse, but the result of deliberate choices made at the highest levels of the company. For the first time, GM faced consequences it could not redirect or bury. And when the settlement hit, GM thought the worst was over. But it was only the first crack in the dam, the settlement shockwave. The announcement of an $888 million settlement landed like a thunderclap across the automotive industry. GM presented the payout as a responsible step toward resolution. But inside financial and legal circles, analysts saw the truth. This was not a conclusion, but the beginning of a far larger financial disaster. The settlement covered only a portion of affected vehicles, and legal experts estimated that total costs could exceed $2 billion once additional lawsuits and regulatory penalties were included. The fallout extended well beyond the courtroom. Investors reacted immediately, pushing GM's stock downward as concerns grew about long-term profitability and public trust. Brand reliability ratings plummeted, with several consumer watchdog groups listing GM's V8 models among the least dependable engines of the decade. Dealerships reported customers backing out of purchases, even those unrelated to the engine scandal, because they no longer believed GM's assurances. Inside the company, executives attempted to spin the settlement as a turning point, insisting that the situation was under control. Yet leaks from internal meetings revealed that leadership feared permanent erosion of the brand's reputation. Rival manufacturers seized the moment, launching quiet but pointed marketing campaigns focused on durability and transparency. The settlement may have been enormous, but its impact was even larger. It signaled that GM's long-protected shield of corporate authority had finally cracked, leaving the company vulnerable to every competitor ready to strike. But while GM tried to repair its image, its rivals prepared to tear the company apart. If you want the full truth behind the decisions that pushed GM toward collapse, make sure you subscribe. Competitors strike blood. GM's engine crisis was the opening its rivals had quietly waited for. As the scandal spread across headlines and social media feeds, Ford, Ram, and Toyota moved with remarkable precision. They did not mention GM by name, but their marketing made the message unmistakably clear. Advertisements leaned heavily into ideas like long-term durability, proven powertrains, and reliability earned through decades of uninterrupted performance. Truck buyers understood the coded language immediately. A wound had opened, and the competition rushed to dig into it. Fleet operators, some of GM's most loyal customers, reacted even faster. Many had endured years of rising maintenance costs and unexpected downtime caused by GM's troubled V8 engines. Once the scandal became public, those operators could no longer justify risking their schedules or their contracts. Orders that once went to GM shifted almost overnight toward Ford and Ram, leaving dealerships scrambling to explain why longtime buyers were abandoning abandoning the brand with no hesitation. The talent drain was equally damaging. Engineers frustrated by ignored warnings, and internal politics left for rival companies promising cleaner processes, better leadership, and the chance to repair reputations stained by association. Their departures weakened GM's technical depth at the very moment it needed stability most. Even the used market collapsed under the pressure. Buyers refused to consider older GM trucks unless they were deeply discounted, and even then, many walked away. The company was losing ground it might never regain, and the feeding frenzy had only just begun. And as competitors feasted, Washington prepared its own attack, the regulatory reckoning. The political response arrived with thunderous force. When congressional committees realized the scale of the deception, they seized the opportunity to make a dramatic example of GM. Executives were summoned to hearings broadcast across the country, where senators demanded explanations for the years of silence and the thousands of families burdened with catastrophic repair bills. Each session felt more brutal than the last. Lawmakers pounded the table, presenting internal emails and engineering reports that contradicted GM's public statements. Regulators followed close behind. Federal investigators opened formal inquiries into whether GM had violated disclosure laws, misrepresented safety issues, or manipulated warranty procedures to reduce financial exposure. International agencies piled on as well, questioning whether affected vehicles sold abroad had been concealed under similar strategies. Suddenly, what GM once hoped to contain within domestic borders became a cross-continental legal threat. Talk of criminal liability spread rapidly. While no one expected executives to face prison, the mere discussion revealed how severe the situation had become. GM's credibility, once a pillar of American industry, crumbled under the weight of televised scrutiny. By the time hearings concluded, lawmakers had drafted new disclosure rules and accelerated timelines for defect reporting. These changes would reshape how all automakers operate, but their immediate function was clear. They were a direct response to GM's failure. The company had not only damaged its own reputation, but had triggered a regulatory tightening the entire industry would feel for years. But the biggest shift was not political. It came from ordinary Americans. The consumer awakening. The public reaction became its own unstoppable force. For decades, car buyers assumed that major manufacturers could be trusted to correct problems, honor warranties, and communicate issues before they became dangerous. The GM scandal shattered that belief entirely. Social networks transformed into watchdog communities, where mechanics, owners, and independent reviewers compared failure patterns with unprecedented transparency. For the first time, buyers researched not only features and prices, but also legal histories, recall timelines, and patterns of warranty denials. Forums began maintaining shared databases documenting which models experienced failures and how companies responded. Consumers learned to identify red flags in service bulletins, investigate hidden design flaws, and evaluate total lifecycle costs instead of short-term expenses. Brand loyalty eroded almost overnight. Buyers who had driven GM trucks for generations openly questioned whether the company deserved another chance. Some shifted permanently to Toyota or Ram. Others vowed to avoid any manufacturer that refused to provide full transparency. This awakening reshaped the marketplace, making ethics as important as performance. Consumers began judging automakers by honesty, transparency, and past behavior. Trust, once broken, proved nearly impossible to rebuild. GM's scandal ignited a new era of accountability, powered by millions of informed buyers determined to prevent history from repeating again. And this awakening did not just change attitudes, it triggered a financial disaster GM never anticipated. The financial avalanche. The economic fallout escalated far beyond GM's initial projections. Legal fees, regulatory penalties, and the massive settlement drained resources that had been slated for new product development. Analysts estimated that the long-term cost of the scandal would reach several billions once every lawsuit, recall expense, and warranty extension was fully accounted for. GM's stock price suffered steep drops as investors questioned the company's future. Market confidence eroded as quarterly reports revealed shrinking revenue, rising legal obligations, and weak consumer demand. Meanwhile, dealership networks across the country struggled to sell models associated with the defective engines. Some dealerships faced inventory stagnation so severe that they risked financial collapse. Higher borrowing costs intensified the pressure as credit agencies downgraded GM for instability and legal volatility, making it harder to fund operations or advance electric vehicle development. Every crisis dollar diverted from innovation weakened
was designed designed to deactivate half the engine under light loads to save fuel. Sounds clever, right? Except that design depends on perfect oil pressure, flawless timing.
Market shifts posed real danger. The avalanche gathered speed, draining resources, eroding trust, and shaking the foundation of an American icon. And just when GM needed stability most, a new crisis obliterated what remained of its foundation: the layoff crisis. The collapse inside GM did not begin with financial reports or investor panic. It began with the faces of workers walking out of factories carrying cardboard boxes. When production slowed and demand weakened, the company made cuts that rippled through communities with the force of an earthquake. Factory Zero in Detroit, once celebrated as the flagship of GM's electric future, reduced its operations from 2 shifts to 1. Overnight, more than 1,000 workers were told their positions would transition, a cold corporate euphemism for indefinite unemployment. At the Ultium battery plants in Ohio and Tennessee, the blow was even more severe. Production pauses stretched from weeks into months, leaving skilled workers uncertain whether they had temporary layoffs or an early end to their careers. These were the jobs GM promised would anchor a new manufacturing era. Instead, the plants became symbols of broken commitments and stalled ambition. White-collar teams were hit just as hard, with entire departments cut and the Georgia IT Center shut down, erasing key innovation roles. UAW halls filled with anger as promises collapsed. The layoffs destabilized entire communities, threatening local economies and leaving workers doubtful of GM's judgment and their future prospects. But the layoffs were only the symptom. The real cancer was killing GM's future. EV dreams in ruins. The deeper threat behind the layoffs lay in GM's electric strategy, a plan once marketed as the revolutionary path to total reinvention. Instead, it became the most public illustration of the company's inability to read the market. Slower adoption of electric vehicles struck at the center of GM's plans, undermining years of confident promises and bold announcements. Consumers hesitated, put off by concerns about charging availability, battery lifespan, and real-world range. The elimination of federal tax credits further weakened demand. Vehicles that once appeared financially competitive suddenly looked too expensive, especially as inflation squeezed households nationwide. GM had built its electric strategy around incentives that evaporated far more quickly than expected. Then came the staggering write-down of $1.6 billion tied to its revised electric plans. It signaled a retreat, not a strategic adjustment. Rivian and Volkswagen experienced similar struggles, but GM's crisis was magnified by its high-profile commitment to an all-electric future. The company had not merely misjudged demand, it had gambled its long-term identity on a transition the market was not yet ready to make. Inside executive meetings, frustration boiled as timelines were pushed back and projects reshuffled. Factories once scheduled for expansion sat underused. Battery collaboration agreements were re-examined. GM was forced to rethink the foundation of its future, shifting from confident promises to damage control. And when investors saw the new numbers, their fear turned into something darker: the investor panic. Wall Street's response to GM's unraveling electric strategy was swift and merciless. Institutional investors, once patient through earlier volatility, began unloading shares, signaling a dramatic loss of confidence. The stock dropped as analysts questioned the leadership's ability to guide the company through simultaneous crises. Financial experts raised alarms about GM's long-term viability, noting that the company had failed to recover from past scandals before plunging into an even larger structural challenge. Pension funds that relied heavily on GM's stability faced uncomfortable conversations with retirees. Their savings were tied to a corporation increasingly seen as unpredictable and poorly positioned for the future. Retirement accounts across the nation reflected the turbulence as families with no connection to GM were dragged into its decline through mutual funds. Markets began searching for a new dominant automaker, no longer assuming GM's place among industry giants. Analysts questioned whether GM still had the vision to survive, citing collapsing loyalty, shrinking share, and supply chain chaos. Doubt hardened into fear, and fear into panic, as investors saw a company nearing systemic failure. And now, with everything shaken, one final question remains, the one GM cannot answer. Can GM survive? What comes next? With the company battered by scandals, financial losses, and collapsing trust, GM faced a future defined by uncertainty. The brand damage inflicted over the past years ran deeper than a flawed engine line or a failed electric rollout. It was cultural. Inside GM's own halls, divisions grew between teams focused on legacy products and those advocating for radical transformation. Engineers questioned leadership's decisions, while managers struggled to rebuild stability within fractured departments. Consumer distrust threatened to become generational. Drivers who once viewed GM as a symbol of American engineering now spoke of it as a cautionary tale. Parents who grew up in Chevrolet households openly openly told their children to avoid the brand. The emotional connection that once made GM a fixture in American life was slipping away. Rebuilding would require far more than cleaner engines or improved warranties. It would require a cultural overhaul, stronger transparency, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about the company's past. GM needed to prove it could prioritize safety, honesty, and long-term planning. Even with a new path, GM faced a changed market, tougher rivals, wary consumers, and intense regulatory scrutiny. Its survival demanded discipline, yet ultimately depended on whether millions of Americans believed the company deserved a second chance to rebuild trust. But GM's fate will not be decided in courtrooms or dealerships. It will be decided by the millions watching what happens next. This story is far from over, and the next wave of information could hit even harder. I want to hear your take. Do you believe these claims, or is something else going on? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want every update the moment it drops, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next.